Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the World of Allergy, a podcast produced by the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. I'm your host, Dave Stukas. I'm a board-certified allergist and immunologist and serve as the social media medical editor for the Academy. Our podcast series will use different formats to interview thought leaders from the world of allergy and immunology. This podcast is not intended to provide any individual medical advice to our listeners. We do hope that our conversations provide evidence-based information. Any questions pertaining to one's own health should always be discussed with their personal physician. The Find an Allergist search engine on the Academy website is a useful tool to locate a listing of board-certified allergists in your area. Finally, use of this audio program is subject to the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology Terms of Use Agreement, which you can find at www.aaai.org. Well, before we begin today, I would like to take just a brief moment to acknowledge the very special milestone of this being our 100th podcast episode. Over the past 5 years, we've had over 200,000 downloads, and to the best of our knowledge, we believe that we're the leading allergy podcast in the world, which admittedly is a pretty small niche area, but still pretty cool. Personally, I truly cherish the opportunity to serve as the producer and host of this podcast, and I've always had amazing support from the Academy leadership and staff. I do need to thank Laura Pliska and Andrew Moore for their help with editing and publishing our episodes. It really is an honor to be welcomed into your devices and accompany you all on your jogs, your commute, or while you do household chores. So thank you. Today's edition of our Conversations from the World of Allergy podcast series is going to be relevant for anyone who uses the internet and pretty much anyone who has friends, relatives, or acquaintances who happen to offer strong opinions on a variety of topics. And today's guest is Timothy Caulfield. Professor Caulfield is a Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy, a professor in the Faculty of Law and the School of Public Health, and research director of the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta. Professor Caulfield is a leading expert in several areas and has over 300 peer-reviewed articles, is a best-selling book author, including one of my personal favorites titled Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything?, and even has his own Netflix series titled A User's Guide to Cheating Death. I mean, I could spend the whole hour just introducing Professor Caulfield, but we're all in for a real treat today with this international superstar. Timothy, wow, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the podcast, and I'm glad that you're here to help us celebrate our 100th episode.
A real pleasure to be here. And wow, 100 episodes. I know that it's a ton of work. So congrats to you. I love that you're out there spreading the evidence-based facts.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been a fun journey. I know you do a lot of media work, and I think we're going to have a great conversation today. And for full disclosure, for you and for our listeners, you're the first guest we've had out of 100 that I haven't shared the questions with ahead of time. And I asked you, and you were okay with that. So the first question I have for you: why on earth did you agree to come on blindly to chat about anything that I throw your way? You're at my complete mercy here today.
It's the deep trust I have for you, Dave. But really, I think with a topic like misinformation, with the role of pop culture in our lives, having a little bit of spontaneity is a good thing, right? Reacting to the conversations and not allowing it to be too scripted. So yeah, it's trust and drama, I guess, that led me to give you that license.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and I will try not to abuse that trust. But since you agreed to it, here's the first question. All right. So, can you tell us about the citizens in Absolute Nine and give us all the details?
Out of the gate, out of the gate, you go with something off the wall. Yeah. So the Citizens there was a band I was in growing up. I don't know if you knew this about me. My career plan when I was like a young adult was to be a rock star, which is not a very good career plan. And the Citizens was the first band I was in. And to be honest with you, I was super proud of it. I was a Clash fanatic. I don't know if you're a Clash fan.
I'm
I
familiar.
still get misty when I hear London Calling. Just spontaneously if I'm in a coffee shop or something like that. So the Citizens, that was my first band, and we actually opened for the Ramones. It was like we were rolling. We were having a good time. And then Absolute Nine was more of a new wave band, and you can actually find some of our stuff online. Please don't.
And what I don't necessarily need to ask your age at the time or now, but what time period are we talking about here for these two bands?
So late high school and then early university, and I mean we were like in vans driving around Canada, and my dear mom, she put up with it. We rehearsed in our basement, and she said she was so supportive. It was incredible. And this is really good. I tried to implement these parenting strategies with my kids. She goes, I don't care what you do, just be happy, but promise me you'll finish university. And I think she knew, right? She tricked me. She tricked me. I think she knew I would fall in love with the academic side, and she was right. She was right. And the other thing, by the way, which is I guess kind of relevant from a medical perspective, I have terrible motion sickness.
Oh,
And riding around in a van from gig to gig, that's tough. So my mom plus motion sickness put me on a more sensible path.
okay. What instrument did you play and do you still play?
I was the lead singer and,
Ah.
yeah, guitar player, and I still play. And so do you know that 10,000 hour rule? This idea that if
Hmm.
you do anything for 10,000 hours, you're going to be great at it. Um, I'm the example that that is not true. So I have played because I even played in a bar band too, and you know how often bar bands play a ridiculous amount. Like we do 3 sets a night in some crappy bar, when I was, as a way to make a little bit of money. And I am still terrible. I am just so bad at guitar, and given the amount of time I've spent with a guitar in my hand, it's really, truly remarkable how incompetent I remain. But my older brother is a bass player. He still plays. He's the real deal. My younger brother Sean, we still jam together. He's a great musician, drummer. I'm the outlier. I didn't get any of those skills.
But I mean, as long as you're passionate about it, that's all that matters, I suppose. All right, so you were guilted, it sounds like, by your mother, to some extent, to go to university. But what motivated you to then pursue a law degree followed by a master's in law?
Yeah, so I pretty early days knew I wanted to do policy work, academic work, and in part because how important are mentors, right?
Hmm.
In people having a good mentor, and I got very early in my career, I had great mentors that um, really showed me how interesting interdisciplinary policy work can be. And so, yeah, I actually went into law school not thinking I was going to be, a lawyer or to have that kind of more traditional path.
Hmm.
Although I did article and everything. I really did want to do policy work, and part of it I like to believe was informed by that punk ethos, the Clash ethos. What would Joe Strummer do? And and this idea that we were going to try to go out there and make the world a better place, and through through that kind of policy work. And so I think that's really what pushed me in that direction. And I loved it too. I don't know what you were like. It's funny, my younger son said this just last night. Just last night, he says he never wants to leave university, and I really loved studying, and I loved the university environment, and so I think that was really part of it. Were you like that? I don't know. That was very much my life.
Yeah, I didn't realize it until recently, but I majored in molecular biology or biochemistry as an undergrad, but I took 7 or 8 psychology classes. And then it hit me after all the social media stuff that I do and working with families with food allergies and anxiety that I've always had this deep-seated interest as to motivations and cognitive biases. And now I'm at a point in my career where I can actually put all that together. So I guess I had, I had the seeds were laid, and I just needed to let them kind of sprout and grow over the years.
Yeah, so relevant now, right? And,
Oh
and
my
that's
gosh.
the other thing, as I said with mentors, Bertha Maria Knopper, Justice Ellen Picard. These were people that loved interdisciplinary research. And right as soon as I became an academic, my first research grants, all that were interdisciplinary, right?
Mhm.
You work with these great teams with people with different skill sets. I just love it. I absolutely love it.
No, I agree. We have a wonderful psychologist at our institution, Jack Stevens, who really taught me about behavioral economics over a decade ago. And immediately the light bulb went off, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this has everything to do with non-adherence for patients with asthma. It's difficult to take your medications, all that goes into that, and the interdisciplinary work. It just changes everything. I couldn't agree more."
Yeah, and I've been fortunate to work in your space with great allergy teams. As part of
Mhm.
Allergen, which is the National Centers of Excellence program in Canada, and you see you see, as you said, economists, you see bench
Mhm.
scientists, you see humanity experts coming together in really creative ways, and I love it. It's one of the best things about being an academic.
Yeah, and you've had a very prolific and productive career in academia. If I may go back to a young Timothy Caulfield, the title of your master's thesis was the last straw, the impact of cost containment in healthcare on medical malpractice law. What's the 60-second elevator speech on what you found there?
Holy cow, that you went deep. You went deep. I
Hey,
don't
you're
think I've
special guest.
heard I don't think I've heard someone read out that title, I'm gonna say 15 or 20 years. Good
It's a good
job, bravo.
title. I'm curious. I want to know what this was.
Slow clap for Dave. Um, uh, so I was that was at a time, and it's interesting because we're going through it right now in Canada, also where people were talking about health reform. It was this,
Mm.
this whole like we've got to reform our healthcare system. We can't afford it, and so it was an analysis of how the law would and should respond to um, health reform and what are the legal obligations. So I was very interested in health policy and in sort of protecting the national healthcare system, and so that was really what that piece was about. And there was some very pedantic legal stuff in there, like how does tort law respond to what are the to cost containment strategies, etc. And one of the but there were some very practical things, like so if you're a physician, and this is still relevant, I've written about it since then. If you're a physician and you have to weigh giving a patient an expensive treatment that's going to strain the healthcare system, or what you think is in the best interest of the patient, tort law says it's always the latter, right? Your responsibility is to your patient, and that creates these fascinating tensions in a system like Canada.
Oh, that's fast. I mean, this is so relevant today, especially in the United States, where we're being pressured more and more. We're not being reimbursed based upon patient-centered outcomes. We're being reimbursed based upon the diagnostic testing that we do. It's not even really medical decision making, and it's really putting a strain on the way that we practice medicine because it's kind of like we're not always being nudged to do what's best for the patient in order to just kind of make a living at what we do, and it's sort of a backward system in many ways, and it needs to undergo all kinds of reform. Maybe you could, travel down this way and help us out with that at some point.
Yeah, it's the same in Canada, to be honest with you. I know a lot of Americans think of the Canadian system as a socialized system, almost sort of
Mhm.
like the National Health Service, and it's not really. It's a private system
Mhm.
that's funded by the government, right? So it is still fee for service. My wife is a physician, my son is a physician,
Hmm.
my brother-in-law is a physician, my sister-in-law is a physician. I'm surrounded by, and it's well, my brother-in-law is an orthopedic surgeon. Is that still considered a doctor?
I'm just gonna let you hang yourself with that one.
um, but we have the same issues here.
Yeah. Going back to some of your early work and ongoing research and things like that, for me, what I tease out is this central theme of ethics. It seems to really lie kind of at the heart of all that you do. Would you agree with that? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think I'd say yes to some degree, but also I think more broadly as policy. What is
Mm.
and that really is what led me to my latter the stuff I've done sort of in the latter half of my career around misinformation, and because I've always been fascinated in what does the evidence say about a position that we're taking. So whether that's position with respect to stem cell policies and researching on embryos, or cloning, or
Mhm.
what does the actual evidence say about that normative position, or research ethics position. And so I like to use the increasingly the more that idea of science or health policy to sort of capture what I'm interested in, and what the evidence says. Because as you know, often the evidence isn't so good. It
Mhm.
isn't so good, and that's often not surfaced in a way that it should be.
Yeah, no, and you and I, for full disclosure for our listeners, we've sort of known each other virtually for a few years now because of similar interests in these realms. But my goodness, just learning years ago to kind of click through the citations that people use and actually look and see what the evidence is that they're using to support whatever their opinion is. My goodness, it rarely adds up. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's shocking. And by the way, that goes through, that applies to, common healthcare practices, right?
Hmm.
Right, to the crazy stuff that we're seeing pushed in the wellness industry, right? Or even something like, we've done a lot of work in the stem cell regenerative medicine space. Beliefs around the efficacy of stem cell therapies, right? This really is, I think, one of the great challenges of our time is making sure the best evidence is actually being used.
Absolutely. Well, when you are so busy and you're such a prolific author of academic articles and then, more popular books and things like that. I love to ask this question of some of our guests who are very similar as far as their writing and things like that. What does your writing process look like? Do you sort of think about things for a while and then just sit down and kind of type it out and you're done? Do you have an outline that you work through? Do you, go section by section? Can you give us some insight into how Timothy Caulfield's brain works?
Yeah, I'd love to. And first of all, I consider myself super, super lucky because I love writing. I absolutely
Mm,
love it. And not everyone's like that. As you know, some people find it a real struggle. Even great writers,
mhm,
they don't necessarily enjoy the process that much. Even if they feel compelled to do it. I absolutely love it. So I don't have writer's block. When I travel, I can't wait to go to a pub and get a Guinness and sit down and and write. So I feel very fortunate that I'm wired that way. And yeah, I often start with an outline. Um, and I do have a process where I read and read and read around the topic.
mm,
Even if I feel like I know the topic well, I still read, and I start every day um, reading research every
mm,
day. And obviously I'm maybe being a little bit exaggerating a little bit if I know I have an obligation or something like that, but I really do try to start every day um, reading the latest research. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that happen because I'll tweet about I'll tweet the stuff I'm reading. So I just try to read around it, and then I do a rough outline. And the other thing I do is I really believe that theory that you shouldn't, writing's about continually moving forward. So I always just keep moving forward. And when I'm writing, I don't worry about having a perfect sentence and then next sentence. I really
mhm,
believe in just keeping the creative flow going. And the other thing I do, I don't know about you, I start in the middle, and
hmm,
then I because often that's where the key point that you want to make is,
mhm.
and then I build from there.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you start, do you go back to the beginning or do you fast forward to the end? Does it vary based upon the topic?
Uh, yeah, I usually go with start in the middle, and then I go back. I go to the start, and
Hmm.
then and but having said that, I'll often have a hook that I want. If let's say I'm writing something for the popular press, commentary, I'll know the hook I want, so I have a
Hmm.
sense of what the beginning's going to be. So,
Sure.
what the hook is going to be. Uh, and yeah, so but I always, because as you know, one of the challenges is getting, you don't have a lot of room. You have
Hmm.
750 words, 1,000 words, 1,000, 1,200 words sometimes. You want to make sure that key point gets the space it deserves while still really, really tight. And so that's one of the reasons I also start in the middle.
No, well, thank you for sharing that. In regards to reading research, most days, to start your day, do you have like a Google alerts that you have set up, or do you just go into, some of the more common journals that you look at, or what does that process look like?
Yeah, all the above, all the above. People ask me that a lot, and I probably should do this in a more systematic. Maybe not, because then I end up in surprising places. But I just Google the top topics. I have colleagues. I have wonderful colleagues at the university that send me stuff.
Hmm.
That they
Hmm.
think I should read. Yeah, I use social media to find stuff. That's social media at its best, right, Dave? When it's
Right.
actually leads you to good research. And then yeah, I have journals that I go to, and, etc. So I kind of do all the above, and also popular press too.
Hmm.
Often leads you to good studies, and I think that is worthwhile because you want to know what's pop culture talking about in the health and science space, and then go look at the studies that are informing that, because sometimes there's a disconnect, right? So it's
Hmm.
worthwhile getting a sense of what's being said.
No, absolutely. We're going to get to the meat of the conversation in just a second, but I have to ask the question that you know is coming, and I'm sure you get 1,000 times. So, what led to you getting your own Netflix series? And then the important questions would be, what did you love most about the process, and what did you hate most about it?
Um, I actually don't get asked that very often.
Oh,
So, uh, it was, I was writing a lot in, the popular press, and I had a couple, books that did very well in Canada out. And so there were actually a couple producers that were approaching me. I was in, about doing a show, and the first idea was to almost be like a talk show, which I didn't want to do. And I
hmm,
don't think it would have been very interesting. And I met with Carrie Mudd, who's the producer at Peacock Alley. Entertainment, and we just totally synced. And I wanted to do something that was shot beautifully, that was sort of cinematic, that had the right tone, that was both funny and empathetic, but still very, very science based. And she was all in. And so that's really what led to it. And she had already got the ball rolling even before she brought me in with respect to funders and things like that. And I've been involved with a lot of documentaries before that, and since that show, and I've got a couple sort of in early stages now. It goes back to what we were talking about, interdisciplinary research. That's
hmm,
doing a documentary is very much like that. So I loved that aspect of it. You work with an editor, you do writing. There's a little bit of this guerrilla style to it. You're in a panic, and also there's this a little bit of that rock and roll element, which I really loved. So relatively small team. You've got, one or two cameramen, you got a sound man, you got the director, you've got you, and you've got usually got one or two fixers with you, and that's it. And you're in a van, again, the van, driving around. I really miss that. Of course, I was this old guy with these, young 30 somethings, late 20s people, and they probably thought, how did I get stuck with this old guy? But I love that. It kind of felt like you were in a band again. What I didn't like about it, and because I had done a lot of media and I hadn't seen this side of it before, it's a lot. There are these long, long, long days that not a lot happens. I'm sure you've heard this
hmm,
before from other people
hmm.
who worked in the media. It's a lot of waiting around. And I, in my head, I thought, okay, that's all right. I'll be able to write while I'm waiting, or it just eats it's massive amounts of time, and you
Hmm.
can't do anything but wait around, right?
Oh,
So,
interesting.
but I loved it. I loved it. It is a crazy business, and it's very, I've very a lot of luck involved, a lot of timing involved, and so that can be frustrating for an academic. We're used to a much more clear process, and that's not
Hmm.
the case uh, in the media.
No, that's so fascinating. And just between the two of us, because there's really nobody listening, anyways. Is this like a lifetime Netflix subscription now for free? Do you have to? Are you good to
No,
go? Oh,
Netflix is a black box that it's a mystery. It is an absolute mystery to me. And I think my producer, who's she's done huge shows, would say the same thing. She would say the same thing.
oh
So,
my gosh.
uh,
All right. Okay. So, I would love for you to define two terms for our audience to help set the stage for the second half of our discussion here. So, can you please define for us misinformation and then disinformation?
I'm going to start with disinformation,
Hmm.
and I actually have what I call the misinformation continuum.
Mm,
On one end of that continuum is the stuff that clearly lies. The people that are pushing it know their lies. They're often doing it for an agenda. And by the way, this also includes state actors, and we
hmm,
and increasingly know it includes state actors. So disinformation is spreading lies, untruths on purpose to fit, fulfill a particular agenda, and that's on one end of that continuum. You move along the continuum a little bit, and you get individuals that are spreading misinformation, things that aren't true. They know that the facts don't support what they're suggesting, um, perhaps to sell stuff, to sell supplements, or perhaps push, their own personal brand.
hmm,
And maybe they've kind of started buying into their own, Kool-Aid themselves, right? And I put people like, Gwyneth Paltrow, the other wellness brand in that kind of that zone of the continuum. Move along the continuum a little bit more, and you have people that maybe suspect this stuff isn't correct, but it speaks to their values.
Mhm.
Um, and I think this is actually a really big category. And there's a really interesting study that came out yesterday or the day before that backs this up. You don't believe necessarily the facts that you're pushing or the misinformation that you're pushing, or at least there's a willful blindness because it speaks so much to your values. You
Mhm.
believe the sentiment behind it. And so this was a big study that just came out that found exactly that a lot of misinformation falls into that category. So, they probably don't think there are microchips in the vaccines, but they feel so strongly that the vaccines are problematic that they're willing to push that. And then you move further along that continuum, and you have people that are pushing misinformation. They don't mean to. They're just trying to do what's the best for themselves, for their family, for their community. That's misinformation. And it's still the problem, of course, is it all does harm, right? It all does harm,
Mhm.
even the stuff on that far end of the continuum where they don't mean to. There's no intent, right, with that kind of misinformation as opposed to that disinformation on the other side of the equation.
Yeah, well, that's a great explanation, and you're right. It's excuse me, this huge continuum, right? And sometimes it seems like it's relatively benign, but it's not because it just chips away at the trust that we have in evidence and things like that. You mentioned a word, and I want to repeat the word back to you. And without thinking, I want you to say the first thing that pops into your mind. Are you ready for this game?
Got it.
Wellness. Oh, wellness.
An infuriating health trend that started, I think, with good intentions and has morphed into a multi-trillion-dollar industry that is built on misinformation, weak evidence, and the exploitation of people's concerns and fears.
Tell us more about the exploitation. I don't know if you coined this term, science exploitation, or I've heard you use it before. Tell us more about that and how that impacts us.
So the exploitation of the wellness that happens in the wellness industry, I think it's complex, and you could build a career studying this because um, often the wellness industry is justified with some reasonableness on the fact that people are not being served by the conventional healthcare system, particularly women and people of color, immigrants. And I totally get that. And there's research to back that up. There's the famous study that suggests that physicians stop listening to patients after 11 seconds. I'm sure you've heard of
Hmm.
that study.
Oh,
And there's been
sure.
other studies that have sort of replicated the spirit of that finding. Um, I've gone to, I think, every alternative healthcare provider, in the world. I mean, different types, right?
Hmm.
And they've almost without exception, it's been a positive experience. You
Hmm.
spend an hour with someone, they're listening to you, often they're touching you, they're giving you personalized advice. That doesn't happen when you go to your family physician or, a specialist. But what's problematic is the wellness industry is exploiting that harm to sell pseudoscience, to sell products that don't work, and sometimes things that harm people. And also, I think it erodes critical thinking. The other thing they're doing, and this touch is a segue to science exploitation, and they're doing this increasingly. It wasn't always like this. Is they're turning to scientific language in order to support their products and their brands. So they, in the past, and I don't know if you've seen this trend also. In the past, you had alternative practitioners, wellness gurus talking about spiritual practices or different ways of knowing. That doesn't happen so much anymore. They say you've got to do a cleanse or take homeopathy because it's good for your microbiome or because of quantum physics, right? Or because of stem cell language. And that is science exploitation, and it's become the norm. And it's
Hmm.
problematic for a whole bunch of reasons. One, it works. Unfortunately, there's studies that have shown if you use sciencey language, it does, create this veneer of credibility that can have a real impact. And the other reason it's problematic, there's a whole bunch of reasons it's problematic, but another reason is it erodes our understanding of science, right? It just confuses our information environment about what's the real science and what's not the real science, right? And as I said, we've done a lot of studies that found this is a very common theme, um, especially with the alternative medicine practitioners, and that it is, I think, very, very confusing.
No, there's so much to dive into here. I always go back to when you have sort of this exploitation, and now I agree with you that we're seeing more of these sciencey sounding words that are used, and it makes it sound more legitimate. But then if you add on top of that a celebrity or an
Yeah.
influencer, a beautiful individual or somebody with a great personality, how does that then sort of add to the influence? And why are people more susceptible to messages from those types of individuals?
Well, we know they are more susceptible, and it's fascinating. I'm sure you've experienced this when you say, "Oh, celebrities are having a really adverse impact," or influencers. A lot of people say, "Oh, I don't listen to celebrities. I don't think Gwyneth Paltrow or Aaron Rodgers is, a credible source of scientific information." But we know they have an impact, right? There's studies that have measured the impact that their rhetoric can have, and I think that's for a number of reasons. Number one, of course, it's just the megaphone, right? The more you
Mhm.
hear something, the more likely you are to believe it, right? And you probably this research from cognitive psychology. If you can recall it faster, you're more likely to believe it. So if Aaron Rodgers says it or Tom Brady, you're more likely to remember that. It's more likely to seem believable, even if you don't remember the source, right? You
Mhm.
and in fact, there's some studies have shown that you'll find in your mind a more credible source than Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or Gwyneth Paltrow to justify your position, even if you originally heard it from a celebrity. So the megaphone matters. The second thing is they are an anecdote, right? Basically, a celebrity is a powerful testimonial, and study after study has told us that an anecdote, a testimonial, a story can sort of short circuit our ability to think scientifically, and I think that's especially true if that celebrity speaks to your values, or you relate to them, or you aspire to be like them. It can make that anecdote all the more powerful, and again, studies have back this up. And the other thing I think often happens is um, they play to our negativity bias. So you'll have a celebrity that will say something, about a product, or about a health strategy, and they'll hang it on a scary anecdote. And Aaron Rodgers did that with his comments about the COVID vaccines. Nicki Minaj,
Mhm.
her famous tweet about her friend's cousin's testicles. I often use that as an example. If you don't remember, she said that she knows of someone whose testicles became enlarged because of the COVID vaccine. That's a perfect example of the power of celebrity, right? She has a big megaphone. She's telling a story about this testicle, and it's scary, right? So it plays to all of our cognitive biases, and that gives it more traction.
Eh, you know, the celebrities are also we feel like we know them, right? We welcome them on our devices and into our homes in many cases for years and years and years, and we feel like we know them because they're always on camera talking. We know their personalities, and it's very familiar to us. Is there any evidence, or do we have any idea of, as medical professionals, if we can get our voices and faces out there as well using social media or Instagram or YouTube, and if we can become more familiar, does that make us more trustworthy as well? Or am I just reaching it, grasping at straws here?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And there's research that backs up, your suspicions about celebrities too, right? That there is this parasocial relationship that people have with celebrities, and social media has only intensified that. Like, where you feel like you're looking into their bathroom, and you're looking into their kitchen, and you feel like their kids. And I'm a huge sports fan, and I feel like I know these athletes that I follow, which of course you don't. Um, and I think there's this interesting tension, I think, with scientists, with researchers, with clinicians, because we want those voices out there. We absolutely do. And you've seen the research, I'm sure. Yes, there's been this massive erosion in trust in all of our institutions, but healthcare providers, especially physicians, remain amongst the most trusted voices. So I think that your community can have such a huge impact on fighting misinformation, especially if you talk about the degree to which there's a scientific consensus. And I would love to come back to that point.
Hmm.
um, but the tension, I think, is you don't, I think some people are worried that you're going to lose your credibility because you're going to come off as glib and frivolous, and that you lose the very credibility that gives you sway in the public sphere. But I think given how noisy our information environment has become, and given the need to have good content out there, I think we should err on the side of engagement and getting out there and having an impact.
What you know, I've been sort of talking about use of social media as a medical professional within my own specialty and beyond for a while now, and I tend to get a lot of feedback from my colleagues of either I don't have enough time for it, I don't have the personality for it, all kinds of excuses not to do it. So for those who don't want to engage, for whatever reason, which is fine, it's not for everybody. What would you say to them in regards to the importance of them at least better understanding how social media and all these factors are influencing the patients that we're trying to care for?
Oh, well, first of all, I agree with you. You really want to encourage and support those healthcare providers who do want to get out there and engage. And so I'm a big advocate of having our institutions support those individuals who are doing it. So, whether you're talking about a hospital or a university or a professional organization, they should really support their members who do want to get out there and fight the good fight. And I'd like to see more of that. And by the way, I mean support it by recognizing that this is an important part of their jobs and they should be
Hmm.
rewarded in their career for doing it. It's not a frivolous thing they do off the side of their desk. This is centrally important, right? The second way I think they need to be supported is the resources, if they need resources to do it and time to do it, but also legally. Sometimes, you need to have that kind of legal support in order to feel like, okay, I can speak the truth without, having to worry about repercussions. So I think we need more of that. And I'd also think that institutions have to start playing a bigger role. So professional societies, again, hospitals, research institutions, etc. Um, and the other thing, I think this has changed over the past 5, 6, 7 years. I think that we need growing recognition of the role of social media.
Hmm.
Just like think of something like TikTok, right? I often get to speak to physicians, and I'll ask how many people here are on TikTok, and there's maybe be hundreds of people in the audience, and a smattering will put up their hand, right?
Hmm.
But 2 billion people on planet Earth are on TikTok. You have to recognize this is how humans are getting their information now. They're getting their information about allergy and asthma and healthcare practices from TikTok, from TikTok. And so we really need to recognize that this is having an impact.
The other thing I hear from a lot of my colleagues is they're just unaware of how the social media algorithms influence all of us on our feeds. Can you speak to that a little bit about how those algorithms really drive the content that each of us see when we log on to X or Instagram or TikTok or whatever that is?
It's so true, isn't it, Dave? It really is, and this is actually a topic that we've studied. Um, I always say, that first page of a Google search. So if we're just talking about search engines, right? That first page of a
Yeah.
Google search, that's your information universe, right? That's your universe. No one goes to the second page, right?
Hmm.
Where do you hide a dead body on the second page of a Google search, right? Because no one goes there. Um, and in fact, studies have shown that many people just look at the top snippet. And our own
Hmm.
research has found that, you Google something like immune boosting. We've done a study on this. Um, it's filled with misinformation. Right? It's just filled that first search, and that's all the algorithm, right? It's pushing now. Entities like Google say they're trying to tweak the algorithm to make sure that that's not the case, but you know their efforts have only had a marginal impact. So yeah, with algorithms, the algorithm has a huge role. Algorithms with social media platforms, massive role. Like, so there have been studies of, for example, of TikTok that have found that as much as 20% of what is pushed by the TikTok algorithm has misinformation in it. And for some topics like the COVID vaccine, as much as 50%, as much
Mm.
as 50% has misinformation in it. And that's, the algorithm creates our information environment. And not only does it push misinformation, but it also helps to create these echo chambers that are so harmful. It helps to create these misinformation communities.
Mhm.
Um, the algorithms are kind of creating our knowledge ecosystem, and that's scary.
Well, what advice do you have for pretty much all of us? So, does humanity stand a chance against social media and the way the world, exchanges information these days? What can each of us do to sort of make sure that we get the right information when we're looking online?
Well, I'm ever the optimist, you know. I so let's start with the good news, right? So the good news I think is that we have more and more research that is informing our fight against misinformation. And I've been studying this for a really long time, and I've never seen anything like we're seeing now. And in part that's because there's growing recognition of how problematic this is. So there's more
Mhm,
funding going into misinformation research. The studies are getting bigger and more robust. The methods I think are becoming more interesting and more rigorous, so that's all really good news. So we're learning about things like pre-bunking and how to best debunk, what kind of regulatory strategies might actually make a difference. So that's all really good news. The bad news is, there's so much bad news, but let me just pick two, so I don't get so I'm not too negative. The first is the role of ideology. I've been
mhm,
studying this health misinformation for a long time, and I've never seen anything like it. It's all about ideology now. I mean, who could have? Can you believe the degree to which being anti-vax has become an ideological flag? I mean, it's just
mhm,
stunning and so depressing, right? Ivermectin. It's an ideological flag. If you could go and ask someone on the street in Canada and the United States a couple of questions about vaccines and ivermectin, and depending on how they answer those two questions, you could probably guess their response to 20, 30, 40 other topics, right? That's the degree to which this has become about ideology. And why that's so scary is once something becomes about your ideology, about your worldview, about how you identify yourself, it does become more difficult to change their minds, right? And
mhm.
unfortunately, all these topics, from supplements, obviously vaccines, to yoga, um, is become about ideology as much as become about hoping this helps you, or your view on that. And I'm going on for a long time, but I think this is a really important topic. And if I
Yep.
could, I just reference one other study that came out really recently. So depressing, but it really speaks to what's going on here. The study was looking at the degree to which the public and physicians' views on COVID therapies has become polarized, right? And so they studied, again, the views of both the public and physicians. And the strongest predictor for physicians and the public on your views on COVID therapies, the strongest predictor, the strongest correlation was the cable news show that you watched,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
So think about that. In the US, you go to see a doctor, and your doctor's opinion of a COVID therapy is more linked to whether they watch Fox News or CNN than the science. That is horrifying, but that's where
Mhm.
we are right now. So the ideology thing is a big problem. The second reason I'm becoming more pessimistic, you could probably guess this: AI.
Oh, yeah.
AI is just going to transform the misinformation landscape, and not for the better.
I want to get back to that in a second, but you made me think of something. In late 2020, when the COVID vaccines were first being deployed, when you looked at the map in the United States of willingness to receive the vaccine, with darker colors being more willing, lighter colors less willing, it matched up perfectly with the electoral map of where people voted in the presidential election that year, based upon Democratic or Republican. And that, like you said, the ideology, people just identify with this, and then they dig their heels in, and they're unwilling to listen to any, alternative viewpoints. It's so scary.
And since then, it's only gotten worse. It's only gotten
Hmm.
worse. There was a study that came out today from Kaiser, um, that found, who's going to get the booster, and it is
Oh, yeah.
just incredible the degree to it maps onto to ideology. Being, your partisanship is the number one predictor of views on vaccines, and that's in the United States, right? Partisanship is a stronger predictor than race, than
Mm.
income, than education. Then insurance, it's stunning and so depressing.
Before we get to AI, this also touches upon what I consider to be a frightening aspect of the world that we live in today, where we have actual medical professionals and experts who are lending their time. Dr. Peter Hotez comes to mind, and they're putting out evidence-based information into the world, and they are becoming victims of targeted attacks by people with very large platforms, celebrities, and this is becoming they're physically in danger at this point. Not to mention just everything that's going on online to ruin the reputation. What are your thoughts on that, and can anything be done?
Yeah, it is horrifying, and I've experienced it myself. The death threats. I've been sued. There are parody accounts.
Mm,
They people have talked about my kids and my wife and my in-laws. Um, it is really problematic, and that goes back to what I said earlier about support. So Um, and I'm sure Peter would agree with this. What's really worrisome is that the young scholars, the young clinicians coming in, are going to hesitate to get involved in public engagement because of this, and we can't let that happen because the trolls, the harassers, win if you do that. And Dave, it's really interesting because I find myself sometimes I pause posting something because I thought, oh God, do I need the trolls? Do I need my inbox to fill up with hate mail? That's them winning,
mhm.
and we can't let that happen. I've even seen, and I won't say what public health aid entity this is, but I've seen public health entities pause or reframe how they talk about masks because they don't, or other things, other interventions, because they don't want to get this polarized discourse. That's horrific because it's letting those people, that's exactly their goal, right? That to create that chill. And we just can't let them win.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I've shifted a lot of my time from X, whatever Twitter is now, more towards Instagram, just because I find it to be more engaging and just more pleasant overall. But every once in a while, I will intentionally poke the bear because you know how to rile up either the anti-vaxxers or others, and I'll use I'll choose my words very carefully, and you put out that one sort of post, and then they just come out of the woodwork, and you do it and you just walk away and you say, yeah, this is the way it is now, and these are the algorithms. But it's so sad and so frightening.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we need to remind ourselves is, social media is not the world. And this goes back to this idea of consensus I was talking about. There was a fascinating study from Europe that found that 4 out of 5 people believe that the medical community is divided on the value of COVID vaccines. Think
Hmm.
about that. 4 out of 5 people in this study believed that the medical profession was divided. Um, and in reality, there's almost universal consensus about the safety and efficacy of vaccines. And that in their
Mhm.
study, over 90% of physicians, only 2% had any concerns, but the public believed they were divided. And that's because of all the loud trolls on social media platforms, creating this false balance perception of the discourse. And the good news is when you explain to people the strength of the scientific consensus, many people shifted their perspective. Not everyone,
Hmm.
not everyone, but you did get a shift in perspective. But our current information environment is a massive false balance machine, right? A both sidism machine that we've got to push back against.
Hmm. Oh boy. Okay. I want to be respectful of your time, so let's get to artificial intelligence. Why does this scare the hell out of you?
It really does. And I'm someone who's done research on the problems of science hype and ethics hype, and I would say, oh, people are exaggerating the harms of cloning, or people are exaggerating the harms of genetic discrimination, and we've got to take a more balanced approach. This isn't an exaggeration, I don't think. I really
Mm.
cannot believe how fast AI has taken off. One of my kids actually works in this space, and she told me a year ago um, that, oh, AI is going to be this massive development. I didn't believe her, and then like 3 months later, it it has taken off. No, yeah, we need to make sure we have evidence informed opinions on this, our policies on this. But if you just look at the degree to which AI can create content, misinformation, the 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 degree to which AI can create, fake science papers. I don't know if you saw that study that came out quite
Hmm.
recently that found that
Yeah.
AI can make very believable abstracts and very believable science documents. The degree to which AI can create these believable images. There was a study that came out again, I'm going to say just weeks ago, that found up to 50% of educators couldn't tell the difference between an AI generated image and a real one. These are these deep fakes, right?
Hmm.
Um, so just the ability to create believable content very quickly, sort of at an industrial scale, is going to make fighting misinformation even more challenging. Layer on top of that the role of state actors, right?
Hmm.
Using AI to push out content, to create doubt, to create dissent, and we have a very scary future.
Have you encountered a deep fake Timothy Caulfield on YouTube yet saying that the COVID vaccines are turning us all into magnets or anything like that?
Uh, I have seen a lot of yes. So the short answer is yes. I
Oh,
wasn't on YouTube, and I don't even want to say where I saw it because I don't want to drive people to that. But yes, I have seen a lot of strange AI generated images of myself and my colleagues. Yeah, very, very frustrating.
oh my gosh, that it really is. It's scary. Well, if I may, how do you deal with it all? You have a lot coming at you, a lot of it negative, a lot of positive, and I know you find this very rewarding. You're also very generous with your time, and thank you again for joining us. So, two quick questions: do you ever get stressed out by all the awful things you encounter, and if so, how do you balance it all? What's your how do you get away and reset your mind?
I do find it exhausting. I'm sure you do too, Dave. And
Mhm.
and sometimes I'll see a post or some, bit of misinformation or a politician saying something, and I just find it exhausting. It's like, oh my God, I don't know if I have the psychic strength to to deal with this. Um, and I have very thick skin, and I like to believe that it doesn't bug me. But the hate and the trolling and the lies, when people are spreading lies about you, and then you see semi-credible people believe it, that is really that can be very frustrating because there's no point in arguing, right? I ignore the trolls, ignore the trolls, ignore the
Yeah.
trolls. So that would be one of my first bits of advice. Don't feed the trolls, just totally ignore them. I think that is almost always the best strategy. The other good news, and you're part of this, is there's a wonderful, wonderful science communication community out there. Don't you agree? And
Yes.
they are very empowering, um, and they're just a fantastic, fun, creative, supportive group of individuals that come from all walks of life. All these different kinds of disciplines, and I find that really empowering. And I draw on it a lot. We all seem to have each other's backs, right? And
Yeah.
so I would say that to young scholars coming up or young people who want to get involved in this, you know, come be part of our community. You won't regret it. It is tough. It can be exhausting, but it is also incredibly rewarding, and so important now. I think it's one of the most important fights we have. There was a study that came out um, last year, late last year. It was a big survey, almost 20,000 people involved in it, 17 countries, I think, and misinformation was right up there with climate change
Mm.
when we talk about world um, problems. And so, yeah, it's an important fight.
Mhm. Oh, wow. Well, where can our listeners find you on social media if they wanna check out the stuff you're putting out there?
So I'm still on X on Twitter. I'm still there. Caulfield Tim. I'm on Instagram. Caulfield Tim. I'm on Threads. Caulfield Tim. I'm on Facebook. All the usual places, and I would love to have some positive vibes to balance the trolls.
Yeah. Well, Timothy, really, I can't thank you enough. You're a very special guest for our 100th episode. This was a great conversation. We could probably talk about this stuff for days, not just hours, for days. So I think we covered a lot of ground. This is very insightful and very helpful. Before we depart, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks for everything that you're doing. And thanks to your community. I see a lot of people from your community out there doing amazing stuff, and I really really appreciate it. And I try to share it when I can.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. We hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode. Please visit www.aaai.org for show notes and any pertinent links from today's conversation. If you like the show, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify so you can receive new episodes in the future. Thank you again for listening.